Greetings and welcome to the Old Patrol HQ podcast. Today we bring you part 3 of a very special ongoing series called Jeff Milton, the forefather of the modern day LINEWATCH agent, with special guest Air Bear Eltringham, class 441, and Old Patrol HQ's foremost historian on all things Jeff Milton. He's a supervisory border patrol agent teaching operations at the academy, and he's been researching Jeff Milton for over 20 years. We're also joined by James Dirt Reed, retired assistant patrol agent in charge out of Spokane sector, class 390, who has a very special historical connection with Jeff Milton. Join us as we continue discussing Milton's younger years. Everyone was something else before they became PAs, right? And sometimes that defines the kind of agent we become. Well, Milton was no different. Come take a listen. Good afternoon, Bear and Dirt, again, and welcome to the Old Patrol HQ podcast.
How's it going?
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you guys. And so we are on episode 3 of our special Jeff Milton segment. To get started, Bear, why don't you tell us kind of where we're at right now in the whole timeline?
Okay. We're basically in the area. We're still in the young phase of JDM's life. This is the era of his Texas Ranger time. It's between 1879 and 1881. We're going to break this into 2 different kind of episodes. This one will be the first portion of, and basically the northern portion of his Texas Ranger time.
Okay.
And then we'll move, next time we do another one, we'll move down into the southwest of where he's operating currently. Some of what's going on at that time in the whole scheme of things is that the railroad, the Texas and Pacific Railroad system, is working to join Fort Worth and El Paso, Texas. It's about a 600-mile trek across there. Mm-hmm. The Rangers have been brought in to basically keep the peace, regulate that kind of stuff. Kind of goes back to that whole Billy the Kid movie, you know,
yeah.
young guns. We do regulating of stealing things. No, they were literally, the Rangers were brought in to do quite a bit of things. They were brought in for the basics of keeping the peace, but they would also be, there's a lot of ranging that they would go out and do. They were looking for Indian bands that were not on reservations, that were still causing a ruckus in the Southwest, mostly the Apache tribe at that time.
They were escorts a lot too, weren't they, Bear?
What's that?
Like they were escorts for like 10, 12, stuff like that.
They were doing a lot of that kind of escort stuff for important individuals that were out, that would come out and see things. They would do a lot of, actually, there's a few things where there was like, they were sent after, like, if rustlers would come and steal somebody's livestock, they were sent after not only the rustlers, but the livestock, and they were to bring that kind of stuff back, those kinds of things. It was very interesting to read some of the things like, you start thinking about that, and I try to tie that in as many times as I can to, like, how is it that what they did then actually coincides with what we do now? And it's like, we're not so much rustling cattle or chasing cattle rustlers, but I was going to say, how many times, Dirt, did we have to move cows for somebody or get them out of the highway and
return them back to where they were supposed to be?
Yes.
Send them back south of the line. We've had to do that.
Well, you're talking about escorting 1012s, right?
Yeah.
We did that all the time, right?
Yep.
We escort 1012s. We're always either calling or working with local ranchers to get their cattle back, or we're getting yelled at for leaving gates open.
Yeah,
that was our biggest claim to fame, I think.
Constantly, or leaving fences down.
Leaving fences down. Yes.
Yeah.
So jack of all trades.
Yeah. Some of the other things that they would do is the same things we do today. They were guarding jails and guarding, basically prisoners. They would go and then they would escort prisoners back to, wherever it was they had to go. One of the first things that Jeff was involved with was there was he was sent to guard a jail, and there was a guy by the name of Sam. Where's my notes here?
Come on, whatever.
Yeah, Sam Horrell.
Yeah.
They were it was part of Lampasas County, and it was the Horrells, and there was another family down there. They had kind of a feud going. So there are a lot of people shooting back and forth. They said they'd gone all the way from the courthouse steps all the way out to the Concho River. That stuff had happened between the two families and the feud going on. Sam
so
Horrell.
During this time, you said days are long and hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know a little bit about that. Sun up to sundown. It's still the Wild West there. That hasn't changed, right? And it continued on to much of Jeff's career. Gunfights, gambling, all that stuff going on. So one of the things I love about Haley's book is that he doesn't just tell you Milton's story. He explains the whole area, stuff that's going on around him culturally, socially, even to the extent of stuff that would today probably get banned, right? Certain words, certain things, but
a bunch of words.
Right. So politically correct, which we are not here, by the way. I want you to speak freely.
Perfect.
But here, that stuff was still going on in Jeff's time.
Yes.
And the way the author described the landscape, not only, the landscape of what was happening politically between families, the law, how it was moving in, but the way he described just the land was, he was a talented writer, man. As soon as he described it, I could picture it. I could smell it, it was just, it was a great book in the way he wrote it. Yeah.
Well, and then later on, a lot of people started their careers in Texas. You get to ride the same trails, the same mountains, the same hills, the same landscapes. So we're not that far removed, aren't we, Dirt?
No. And I know I'll get into it later, but just knowing about this book, and when they turned me on to it and reading through it, and he said, you need to read it because it talks about where you grew up. It talks about, so when I started seeing the Butterfield line and the Mugiones and all that, I was like, okay, I have to read it now.
So you're from Texas?
I'm from New Mexico.
Oh, New Mexico. It's same thing.
Same thing.
Same difference.
Better chili.
They have definitely better chili.
Yeah.
So they basically got sent out to do a lot of escorts, a lot of guarding of prisoners, keeping the peace in towns, and then the railroads, as they would move, the tent towns that they lived in would move as well, and they were kind of rowdy, bawdy places. They were, the dance halls and the saloons and everything were all in the tent. The tent.
I watched Deadwood.
So as the train track moved, that's how it moved, and they did a lot of that, and it was kind of crazy. The men and there were two different types of people. There were the railroad workers, and then there were the cowboys. Mm-hmm. And the cowboys at times thought, hey, this is an encroachment on us. This railroad coming through, and we're gonna, and so there was plenty of animosity at times back and forth. And then there was a lot of animosity between the law and the lawlessness that was going on at certain points too. Just kind of like literally like we do today.
We
don't take the no law around here, law dog.
Yeah, we don't law don't go around here.
Yeah, that's it.
And all three of us has faced that throughout our career.
Yeah.
We've had the guys that just stand up and like, we're not listening to you. They're like, well, we can convince you different.
Yeah. Amen to that. So you gotta you're looking at looking at the because we got to stay on an outline because you got 3 PAs here. And thank God we're not drinking because this would have been a 3-hour conversation, right?
Oh yeah.
Or better. But you have a list of Rangers and how Jeff Milton worked closely with these guys. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So one of the first guys that was mentioned in the book that he worked for was a guy by the name of Captain Ira Long. And Ira Long was an interesting character for Jeff because Jeff said that at first he didn't realize it, but he figured out that Captain Long was the guy that couldn't read. He couldn't read or couldn't write. So he basically had two guys that would work for him. And basically one of them was Jeff, who would read the paper to him. And he'd be like, "Oh, that's really interesting. Read that article to me again." And he would do it like 2 or 3 times. And the guy had like almost like a photographic memory, but he had a memory where he could memorize something. He said for months later, he could quote that article verbatim to somebody. But all of his official correspondence and all that kind of stuff that went back and forth between the Frontier Battalion and Ranger HQ down in Austin was actually read and written by Captain Long's brother-in-law, who was a Ranger as well. Wow. So one day Jeff went down looking for a newspaper that Captain Long had, and after a few tries, Captain Long just looked at him and said, "Well, find it yourself." So he went and found it, and then that's when Captain Long said, "Jeff, I see that you know that I can't read." And he said, "And I'd appreciate it if you kept that to yourself." And Jeff he honored that, and so that was one of his first commanding officers. The next commanding officer that once Captain Long got transferred out, the next commanding officer was a guy by the name of Captain Brian Marsh, who was he was a fire eater, to say the least. They said that Jeff said that he would, he said he could put a couple drinks in him and he'd spit in a tiger's eye. He wasn't afraid of a fight. He had lost one of his arms during the Civil War at the shoulder, and his other hand was very much mangled up. He was not afraid to confront people, and that was shown. There was some issues that happened at Fort Concho. Fort Concho had one of the soldiers was killed by a rancher. The soldiers went out and started to say they were going to revolt against the town. Like the town, literally, the women and kids, they sent them away. And so only the men were there. So then the men of the town reached out to the Rangers. The Rangers showed up. It's basically said that Captain Marsh showed up, pitched camp, took 2 shots of whiskey, and walked over to the garrison commander's office, which was he was a colonel. He was a guy by the name of Colonel Gearson, who was the commander of the base. He walked into he told Jeff, there's a great line, I have it in my notes, but he said to Jeff, see if I can find it real quick. He said, "Jeff, get your Winchester, throw a shell in it, and kill the first man that bothers me." He said, and I almost had to shoot the base commander.
And he would have done it.
Yeah, and he said I would have done it too.
He would have done it, But you know what? Don't you think, guys, that it would have been the embarrassment of getting your ass beat by a one-armed man would have been enough to stop any fight?
You would think. Yeah, definitely. But basically, Captain Marsh read that Colonel the Riot Act and said, "If anybody from this base crosses that bridge without a pass, I'm gonna kill him. I'm just gonna shoot him." And he meant it. And nobody crossed that bridge without a pass after that point.
And they understood, they believed.
They understood that he meant business.
Yes.
He wasn't playing around. And that was the Texas Rangers basically standing up to the U.S. government at the time, because it was the U.S. cavalry that he was standing up to that happened. So, yeah, it was so him. And then some of the guys that he ran around with were a guy by the name, they called him his name was N.L. Jenkins. Mm-hmm. And in the book, there's a thing that says that there's a letter somewhere that's written and it's signed. It says N.L. Jenkins. And below it, it's written in script. It says, "This is N.L. Jenkins's signature." And Haley kind of pondered that a little bit when he was writing about the book, because Jenkins they knew the boys called him Buffalo Bill Jenkins. They said that he was kind of like a frontiersman. He could run a half a mile, a full sprint, stop, and draw a bead on his pistol or his rifle that was as steady as if he'd just been standing there the whole time. He was a good shooter. He was a good man, always good in a fight. And but he didn't know how to read or write. And Jeff taught him how to read and write, and I taught him how to sign his name. And so Haley kind of looked at that and said that may have been Jeff's penmanship underneath there, saying that was Jenkins's signature there. Another guy that was kind of prominent was a guy by the name of Dave Ligon.
Yeah. I love that segment.
Think about, I was going to say, for all the guys out there, think about your salty old journeyman. He said the first thing that happened when he rode into camp for the very first time as a brand new Texas Ranger. He got off his horse, and Dave walked up and knelt down in prayer and prayed for the young tenderfoot. And he goes, that was one of the most interesting prayers there ever was. He goes, because Dave Ligon was one of the most profane individuals I've ever met. He goes, to the point of that if there was an electrical storm out on the prairie, nobody wanted to sleep near him because they thought the Lord would throw lightning down and strike them dead. You'd be too close.
Yeah. So, and we all know those type of journeymen. Nowadays.
Yeah.
What's that, Dirk?
Call that guy potty mouth nowadays.
Well, we all have those type of journeymen, right?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day in El Cajon Station, a certain agent used to call, if he called you a peckerhead on the radio, you felt like you were part of the group. If you know what I mean? So you always had those guys out there. They didn't care what they said on the radio,
I can think of a few of those.
Yeah.
Two of the other guys that come into kind of a pretty big thing based around today is a guy by the name of J.M. Sedbury, who was a corporal in the Rangers, and another guy by the name of L.B. Wells. They will come into play here in a little bit.
Okay.
They were just regular Rangers that ran around with him. Another guy by the name of Dick Ware, who was he ran for sheriff of Mitchell County, but Dick Ware was also he was famous for being the guy that basically took down Sam Bass, the outlaw Sam Bass.
Really?
Which was a pretty big deal.
Yes.
And then one of the other guys that was prominent there was a guy by the name of W.H. King, who was a politician who was appointed the adjutant general of the Ranger Service. And the problem is he didn't like the Rangers to start with. And
There's always that one.
We got those two.
He said that he reported to the governor that he had heard there was a lot of bad things and he was going to disband the Frontier Battalion, and he actually did, because his guy went up and investigated some things that he had heard, and they were true, and none of the other guys, but it is what it is.
Right.
They did disband the Frontier Battalion, but they became part of a different company. All it was just they brought new guys in and added to who was out there, basically what it came down to. Some of the locals in that area were a guy by the name of Sam Horrell. Like I said, he was the guy that was in the feud that went on in Lampasas County. The interesting thing about that is Jeff was real young when he first joined the Ranger Service, and he was part of bringing that guy in and part of protecting him in a jail. And he had gone on and done a lot of other things. And later on in life, Jeff was actually tracking some outlaws up in the Mogollons and wandered into a ranch and literally looked at the man and knew it was Sam Horrell. But at that time he had changed his name, which many people did back in them days. They were trying to outrun their reputations and outrun bad things they'd done in their past, and they were trying to do good things after that. And actually, Dirt and I were talking about this yesterday. It was probably one of the best shows of officer discretion there is.
A great example.
A really good
example of officer discretion, that he comes upon this guy, sees that this guy has started a family, he's being a member of the community, and makes this decision. It's just not worth it. This guy, I could haul him back to Texas. I still got a paper on him, but
Really?
Yeah. He knew there was a reward for him for the return of him. He actually spent the night there with him, never let on that he knew him. The guy never recognized him because he had gotten older and matured.
Really? So he didn't know that was Jeff. Okay.
Nope.
That's really interesting. Yes.
Right. So Jeff knew him by sight, and that guy didn't recognize him. And Jeff knew he had a price on his head, and he just let him be.
He had a really strong that code of honor and code of ethics, right? But but he also showed, that's one thing that everybody seems so surprised about today is that we as Border Patrol agents, we protect people, we rescue people. How many times did you come across a group that was happy to see you because they had been abandoned by the smugglers or the coyotes because they thought they were going to get caught, and those people have been either they're starving, they're freezing to death, they're dehydrated, and they see you and they're actually glad to see you. And if we are not chasing them, Dirt, nobody knows they're even out there.
Yeah, it's true.
I don't know. I don't know a PA that hasn't given up their lunch for somebody else.
Correct.
I don't know how many times I drove, and Dirt will know. I don't know how many times I drove through the Burger King drive-through there in Bisbee and bought 59-cent hamburgers just to shove them back through the grate and be like, "Here you go, have something to eat."
Correct. In our tricky bags, I used to carry bags of candy because we used to catch a lot of kids and stuff like that, and I always had extra food after a while because, we know the humanity of it, but
yeah.
Well, I always put 2 elk burritos in my kennel pack, and usually I only ate one of them. So
yeah. So that's just a great example. Though, see, he sees this guy. He sees that his whole life has changed. He's not a threat. He's not a threat to society, and so he leaves him be, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, I thought that was a really cool one.
Yes.
A couple of the other guys that we talked about. Well, a couple of guys that we will talk about here. A guy by the name of John Good. John Good was kind of like a cattle baron. He was the fat, rich cattle guy, and he liked the rowdier side of things. And there was a guy by the name of W.P. Patterson, who was also a rancher. And that Mr. Patterson and a guy and Dick Ware were actually running against each other as for sheriff of Mitchell County, Texas.
Oh, okay.
And basically, Patterson represented, by way of the backing of Mr. Good, the rowdier element and the more lawless, whereas Dick Ware represented the law and order and that kind of thing. And it got to be kind of a bitter, like a bitter campaign. And Dick Ware ended up winning. Okay. Well, with that became the problem along with that, Mr. Patterson, he was a good man unless he was drinking. And I'm sure we can all.
Well, you say here, sore loser and a drunk, which is not a good combo.
Yeah, he really kind of wasn't. He was. I'm trying to find in my notes where I put him. Patterson was a good man, but got drunk often and stayed drunk long. It was what they were saying about him. So at that point in time, the Rangers that were working there and Jeff and those guys, they were operating out of Hackberry Springs, and they lived basically in a dugout on the side of a hill. And they had no jail, nothing like that. So when they were hauling prisoners in, or when they arrested somebody, like, they didn't have anywhere. So basically what happened was he got drunk and disorderly, that kind of thing. So they took him down to where they were camped, and they chained him to a mesquite tree. And
not once.
Haley talks about how the fact that, that was kind of just wasn't the way that a prominent cattleman who was used to being independent and free should be treated. So that.
You think?
And it happened more than once, because he got drunk more than once because he was mad because he lost the thing. He lost the race for sheriff and this, that, and the other thing. So that basically he had been released, and he went back into town, and there was some shooting on one end of town, and it was Jeff and two of his buddies, Sedbury and
too.
Yeah.
And I think Buffalo Bill.
Yeah, I think Bill was in town at that time with them, but it was Sedbury who was the corporal, who was basically Jeff's boss. And Wells was another just junior ranger like Jeff was. They saw that Patterson was in town with his brother-in-law, a guy by the name of Adair, who was the son-in-law of Mr. Good. So there's like this big incestuous thing going on at that time. Well, they were drunk, and he told him, he said, I need to. So Sedbury said, hey, I need to see your gun. And at that time, like, he says, I need to inspect your pistol. I want to see if it's been the one that's been shot off and that kind of stuff, because we can't be having that. And if it is, you're going to, and the guy's like, you're not going to check my pistol. And he was like, I am going to check your pistol. And the guy pulled the pistol on Sedbury and shot at him. He missed, and he never got a chance for a follow-up because Jeff Milton pulled his pistol and shot him dead.
Holy cow.
And that became probably one of the biggest things of Jeff's Ranger career. So it took about 3 years for the whole trial. Well, part of tying some of that in was very interesting, because there was a big mom mentality, because Patterson was one of the prominent local ranchers.
Right.
You didn't have to do that. So they went to, they're like, so the mob was going to like string these 3 Rangers up, and they're like, no. So they went to present to court, and they showed up, and the judge was like, you can't come in armed. And he's like, all right, fine. But we're going to be escorted in by our friends, by our fellow Rangers. So his fellow Rangers, literally, it was, you have a Ranger, and you have one of the guys unarmed, and a Ranger, and unarmed, and Ranger, and unarmed. And it was basically the fact of that they'd all taken off their pistols, and they were sitting there, but the other guys, my dog's just watered in. Sorry.
No worries. I was just thinking, just what you just mentioned, and you're not done with the story, but it's like, how is this not a freaking Netflix series, right? Because I'm watching right now the series on Bass Reeves.
Oh yeah.
And if you notice the title of that program, it's Lawmen, not Lawman. So I'm wondering if that's not going to become a series, and I would love to see one day, Bear. I would love to see it say Lawman Jeff Milton.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
But please continue.
Oh yeah. So basically, they had to report to court.
That'd be cool. Netflix
they were supposed to show up for court unarmed, so they did. They were stacked between other armed Rangers.
Yes.
Had basically strapped on those guys' guns on their left hip, so that if they needed to fight their way out, they were side by side. Yep. Could just reach over and grab the pistol that they needed.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Seems like everybody in court would have behaved then. Patterson's men and all them would have behaved.
Yeah. So yeah, that was so that started that whole thing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next one. But
okay.
Yeah, that was one of those it became kind of, it's just like everything else, it's everybody gets to quarterback you after when you had to make a split second decision. So, but they knew they were in the right, and they had the right on their side. The one big issue that I think Jeff took from that, and that was a problem for him, was the fact that W.H. King said, we don't provide legal help for just the enlisted Rangers, only the officers, if they get, because the enlisted really don't have the authority, even though we're telling them they have to go do this job. So Jeff and Sedbury and Wells had to actually secure their own and pay for their own legal defense. Yeah. And that
doesn't strike a nerve today. I don't know what does. Jeez.
So that was one that was a kind of, yeah. So I know that, like, getting on to kind of some of the things that took on, the other things that happened, we've always heard of the Border Patrol has to supply their own stuff, right? Back when the Border Patrol began, they had to do it. Well, actually, it was kind of interesting, because as a Texas Ranger, you literally had to do that. Like, you had to supply your own saddle, rope, guns, gun belt, bedding, horses, not just one, multiple horses.
Yeah.
Because you had to be, they rode anywhere from 150 miles to 1,100 miles, depending on what the mission was.
Are you kidding me?
No, on horseback. That's how they rolled. They had to provide their own clothing and boots. They had to wear a white hat. They had spurs. Yeah, if you lost a horse in an Indian fight, struck by lightning or any other act of God, it was your loss.
Jeez.
You had to replace it. It wasn't the service's loss. When you signed on as a ranger, you were issued 100 shells, and then the state would issue you 12 rifle shells and 6 pistol shells every month thereafter. That was your allotment. So yeah, basically you had to supply your own ammo half the time if you got into something. The one thing that they had was the one regulation they had to have was they had to have a repeating 44 rifle. So Jeff, thinking he was going to be something cool, went out and found a 44 pistol. And whenever he shot that pistol, the problem was the primer would back out and it would jam. And so they were visiting some town, and there was some gambler there that wanted that pistol. And he was like, I'll trade you for that 45 you got. So they made a trade, and the pistol that it comes into play actually in the next segment, but he traded a pistol that had on the heels of the pistol, or the grip, it had a set of cards carved into it, a deck of cards of each card. And that pistol actually comes into play later on in the book and in Jeff's life with another ranger that shows up. And so he actually gives that away in the future. And what happens with it is kind of interesting. And, if it had happened more in the Old West than it had where it happened, probably wouldn't have been a big deal. But where it happened, it became a real big deal. But yeah, they had to supply all that stuff. So it was, when we go back to, when the Border Patrol was formed, you had to bring your own horse and your own gun. Well, yeah. I mean, Jeff knew how to do that. He had already got that at one point in time. So,
yeah, he was used to that.
He was used to that kind of stuff. Some of the other things that I'm trying to think of, he got promoted during this time period. He got promoted to corporal, or lance corporal. I'm sorry. He wasn't quite a corporal, but got promoted to lance corporal. He got lost in the winter or in the fog one time with another guy. He said they got lost in the fog and they had to hole up for like 2 days.
They had to almost starve to death.
Yeah, they actually had to shoot a coyote to eat. And he goes, then when the fog lifted, he goes, we were surrounded by like thousands of antelope because we couldn't in the fog. But they ended up eating a coyote. That's actually one of the other stories that's kind of funny, in that in this time period, he went to town and went to have some dinner, and there was a rabbit stew that was there, and he was like, I'm good, thank you, please take this away. And I go, oh no, it's a great rabbit stew. And he's like, it got to the point where Jeff's finally like, he couldn't take it anymore. I've killed way too many prairie dogs to know that the rabbit bones aren't red. And the lady he goes, and then he felt bad because some other lady that was sitting over there like lost her appetite and that kind of thing.
Jeez.
He hurt the cook's feelings.
Yeah, he hurt the cook's feelings and that kind of stuff. So yeah, kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, you talked about that the Rangers were called in for just about everything. Just like, we're out there. We're the only law enforcement in the area. Many times we've answered domestic calls. We've answered, break-ins. We answered a lot of different stuff like that. So you talked about that, especially the recovering of livestock and all that kind of stuff. So what about the connection with the AORs? Let's talk about that with our AORs.
Right. Basically what we're at right now, we're working. He worked here. This is Big Ben's AOR. It would have gone all the way up to the old station up in Amarillo. At one point, they've closed that down. There used to be a station in Midland, and I don't know if there's one there anymore. I don't think there is. I think they closed that one as well. But Midland's close to Pecos and Colorado City and all that kind of stuff. So they're talking about, there used to be a station in San Angelo. Actually, I believe that's where Kim Grady went when he left, wasn't it, Dirk?
I think so. Where he retired to.
him and Jeremy went over there, I think, when he retired. But San Angelo, Van Horn, Sierra Blanca, Big Spring, that kind of stuff. Those are the towns that they operated around.
Yeah.
Fort Griffin area, Fort Concho area. So all that right now is really centered around Big Bend and the towns, as like I said, Colorado City, the towns that formed during that time period that are kind of still there today. Some of that area that some of these agents might be familiar with, or stations where they work. I mean, like I said, they're still stationed in Van Horn, they're still stationed in Sierra Blanca.
Yes.
And like I said, we're going to work southwest in the next episode to that, deeper into Big Bend's AOR. So
there's a couple of segments here that I do really want to get to. Number one is the shenanigan part, and number two is the how does this all relate to our modern ages today. But I really am excited to get the dirts part and why we invited him here to this Jeff Milton segment today.
All right, so one of the players during that time, one of the civilian players during that time was a man by the name of Lee Rice, and it's actually footnoted in the book. It's in the book on page 50. There's a note that talks about Lee Rice and his encounter, his chance meeting, or not chance meeting, but basically his encounter with Jeff Milton. So it said the footnote says Lee Rice, pioneer cowboy of the Concho country and early settler in the Mogollons of New Mexico, came through Colorado City while Patterson was chained to the tree and stopped over at the ranger camp. And then it says Lee Rice to Jeff Milton, January 31st, 1942. Mm-hmm. So on some of my stuff, when I was chasing earlier, and it's been a couple years now, when I was chasing some Jeff Milton stuff, I came across something at the library, at the J. Evetts Haley Library, and I was like, look at this. This has got to, and I sent it, but I'll read you the letter. It's not super long, and it's kind of written cowboyish.
Okay.
I'd made a few corrections, not like so that I can read it a little easier.
Just so we can understand it.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting. So it says Lee Rice.
This is from Lee Rice, right?
Yeah.
The one? Okay.
Yeah, this is the letter. So this says Lee Rice, high-grade Hereford cattle, hay, and grain. Cliff, New Mexico, January 31st, 1942. Mr. Jeff Milton, Tucson, Arizona. Dear friend, I've noticed Frank King mentioning you in the Maverick column of the Western Livestock Journal and from time to time, and have been thinking of writing you for some time. Although I don't suppose you will remember me, as it has been a long time since I saw you, but I remember you well. I left my home in Springfield, Illinois in April 1881, was 18 years old, and came out to Colorado City about 3 days before the T&P Railroad got there. That would have been the Texas and Pacific Railroad.
Okay.
Came from Abilene on construction train as far as the track was laid, then walked about 3 miles on in to Colorado City. The passenger cars only came west as far as Abilene. When I got to Colorado City, I just had 35 cents left and did not know anyone there. But I soon got acquainted with some of the rangers, and they told me to come down to their camp. Some of them would be going down to San Angelo in a short time, and they had an extra horse and saddle that I could ride and go with them as far as the Half Circle S Ranch on the North Concho. That was where I had started when I left Illinois, as my brother Emmett Rice was the foreman there. You likely knew him better than you did me, as the Rangers usually stayed overnight there when passing back and forth from Colorado City to San Angelo, Texas. I have forgotten some of the names of the Rangers that was stationed at Colorado City at that time, but remember yours, Buffalo Bill, Wells, and Sedberg. One of you boys gave me a 45 Colt to buckle on when we went up to town and told me if anything got started to stay with you. But there was only one shooting while I was with you, and that was a cowboy by the name of Blake that was working on the slaughter ranch west of Colorado City. He got pretty well boozed up and started some rough stuff at Arch Johnson's amusement hall that night, and one of you boys told him to leave town or he would have trouble. So he got on his white pony and left, but hadn't got out but a short ways until he began shooting back into town. Buffalo Bill, as you called him, taking a couple of shots near the boy, and he got in high gear right away. We could see him very good as it was a bright moonshiny night. The day before I got to Colorado, some of you boys had a man by the name of Patterson tied to a mesquite tree to sober him up. About 5 or 6 days after I got down on the North Concho River, I heard that Patterson came back into Colorado City and got on another whiz and got killed by the Rangers who were detailed to arrest him. As I remember, you were one of the men that undertaken to make that arrest. You boys were camped in a dugout near the river and had a lot of buffalo meat dried. I thought it was the best dried meat I ever ate. When we would start up to town, I usually put some in my pocket to eat on. You boys was so nice to me while I was with you that I have often told people about and think of you all so often and have wondered where you all are now. I will never forget how nice you was to a kid tenderfeet and wish I could at least partly repay you for what you did for me. If you ever get up this way, I certainly would appreciate having you make us a visit. I worked on the Conchos from 1881 until 1886 and then moved a small bunch of cattle that I had bought out here 50 miles west of Silver City and have been here since. I got married in 1898 to a New Mexico girl and have 3 boys and 1 girl, which are all married and have children of their own. So I now have 14 grandchildren all living near me, and I enjoy them very much. I am now 78 years old and am still active. I hope this finds you enjoying good health and would be real glad to have a letter from you. Until the last few years, I got letters from several of my old cowboy friends, but most of them have attended their last roundup. Thanking you again for what you did for me. I am ever yours, Lee Rice. Well, wow. The interesting thing about that was, so I found that, and there is a certain individual that I know that might be related to that individual.
To Lee Rice?
To Lee Rice. And his name is Mr. James Stewart Reed.
Yeah.
So, a little bit of that background there. So, who was Lee Rice to you there, Dirt?
He was my great-great-grandfather.
Wow.
That's kind of cool.
Well, of course, I didn't get to know him because he died in 1947.
Oh, really? I thought, I thought that's why they called you Dirt, because you were as old as.
I am as old as Dirt now. It didn't mean as much when I was in my 20s and 30s.
True.
But yeah, Lee was my great-great-grandfather. His son, he talked about his 3 kids. His son was Blue Rice, and he's the one that was running the rice ranch when I was a little kid. And so Blue Rice taught me how to drive. He taught me how to ride. He taught me how to rope. He taught me how to do all kinds of things. And then he was an old man by the time I was, teenager. Yeah. But, him and his son, Roland, and my dad, we're all cowboys. So we all worked the ranch. I mean, they did it full time. I was in school and everything else. But, if I could have back then, I would have been full-time rancher and said hell with school and everything else. But probably a good thing I didn't. Yeah.
But you decided to join the Border Patrol.
Yeah, it took some convincing, but I joined the Border Patrol in 1998 with Class 390. Before that, I was in the Air Force. Went to Desert Storm. I was over there from 88 to 92, and came back, kind of wandered around, figured out what I wanted to do, and in 98 I joined the patrol. And at the advice of and coaching from a guy named Esker Mayberry, which he was my dad's neighbor. So went down there because I was like, I don't know what to do. I know I don't want to stay in the mine forever. So you joined the patrol, went to the academy in 98, on FTU in 99, and on horse patrol in 2000.
So you went to Charleston?
Yeah. Charleston.
Okay, so not all of us can be Glencoe rock stars.
Yeah, well, I got one guy in Charleston, 390. Mick Boone was my lead instructor. So
the official bourbon of Old Patrol HQ.
Exactly. And I've got my stock in there. So
me too.
And I've got my stock in my cabinet.
Okay, and somebody better pay us both for that shameless plug.
Oh yeah,
Mick.
well.
But so where did you report to when you left Charleston?
I went to NACO. I was in Naco for about 8 years. Then I souped up to Deming, and I was in Deming for like 9 months. Lateraled over to Lordsburg because they were hurting for soups as usual, and that was closer to home because I had moved into Silver City.
Yeah,
and was there for about 8 years, almost 9 years, and then I went to the academy to teach driving, and for about a year and a half, promoted to sector as an ops officer, and I was there for about a year and a half, and then I went to Washington as a DPAC.
okay.
In Falls, and then I retired out of there with 22 years.
So real quick, what was the traffic like in Naco when you first showed up there?
Crazy. It was, you know,
Wild West?
Yeah, people say it's shooting fish in a barrel, but I mean, it was dangerous. We had, FTYs every day. We had, that was hot roads. That was washout. That was, Bear knows about washout.
I participated.
Oh yeah. But yeah, it was busy. So we always had the tank full, and it was good.
Do you have a particular story that you like to tell when you're sitting with the guys having beers or whatever, or some Boone's bourbon?
Oh, there's lots of stories, but a lot of them I'd have to go back and look if there was a what'd you call it earlier?
Statute of limitations.
Yeah, statute of limitations on there. Yeah, so we'll keep it mild for now then.
No, I mean, well, I did most of my time on horse patrol, and most of that time on horse patrol in Naco was night shift because we were still using scopes heavily.
Oh,
so
yeah.
we were popping these groups on Fort Huachuca that numbered 100 to 300, and that was every other night. So yeah, a lot of action. Oh, here's a story.
All right,
if you want it, just a short one, real quick.
No, please.
Well, we had a horse.
If I have to cut this thing in 2 segments, I don't care.
Okay.
Right.
Well, we had a horse that was got hurt because of the only time a horse gets hurt is because a PA did something stupid.
Ah.
And this was the case in that. A horse got tied up on a lunge line to graze and tied himself up and basically cut through his flesh, and we had to take him off the roster. He was all tore up.
Oh.
And then about a year later, Carl Norton, you heard about him. He was my wrangler. And he said, hey, you need to take Chester out and ride him. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to lunge him for a while. But as soon as we got in the trailer, we headed up the road, and the cameras, this was right after we got cameras picked up a group coming through John Ladd's place. And it was like, oh, I guess we'll just go. So we went down John Ladd's driveway, started to untrailer. I got on that horse. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to ride him, and we're going to catch this group, because I could see the group, and I had buck fever at that point. I'm like, let's go. Let's get the saddle on. So I got on him, got throwed off. Oh, well, I ate it, man. Pretty good. I mean, not bad. I mean, threw my binos off, threw my camelback off, threw everything back on. Sitting there looking at the group that's still about 3 miles away, but I can see them coming down the other side, And so I got everything back on, got thrown off again. And the third time, I don't know if you've ever heard this, the horse bottle rocketed. You know what bottle rocketed mean? He reared up and jumped straight up in the air. And, the first time he was just bucking around. He bottle rocketed, and
he wasn't having it.
And the pole of his head, which is that bone right between their ears, hit me right in the mouth.
Oh.
And it split my lip, tore my lip down, broke my nose, knocked me out cold. I didn't feel a thing. And I landed perfectly right in between two ruts of rocks, landed right in the silt. So I made the little mushroom cloud. But, being PAs, because the other two PAs that were with me is like, just let us go and we'll get them. And we'll bring them back, and you can help us, ride them up and everything. I'm like, I know I'm going to get this horse. I'm tougher, I'm meaner, But anyway, I came to, and, of course, I'm mouthful of dust and bleeding and everything else. And I will censor this. But one of the riders, there was 2 riders, Ray Bresnahan and Marshall Schneiderman. I don't know where the hell they are now. But
Ray's up in New York now.
Yeah, but Marshall's looking down on me, and he's like from New York. He's looking down at me instead of saying, hey, man, are you okay? God dang, that was crazy. He's like, dude, your face is effed up.
Typical PA.
And that's all I remember. And they're like trying to help me up, and they got me up, and I keeled over. I passed out again and went face first, into the dirt. And next thing I know, I wake up, I'm in a truck with the sensor guy, who was my FTO, and he's taking me to the hospital. And I'm like, "Hey, Doe, what's going on?" He goes, "Yeah, just relax. We're taking you to the hospital." So they took me to the hospital, and called my wife, and she showed up, and it was, they took a preliminary X-ray, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And a nurse ran out of the room. I'm like, "Well, that's not good." And they said, "I mean, it looks like his spine is shattered," and it was like my neck and my back. And
whoa!
About that time, the PIC shows up, which was a guy named Vic Manahares and Frank Almarias. They're some old timers, and they're like, "Oh, just stay still." And my wife's there, and then after a while, they put me through a CAT scanner or MRI with the big tube, and I'm laying there, and they run it through and everything else, and they're like, "No, you're fine. You're going to be sore for a while, and they're going to have to sew up your face." I had like 6 stitches in my lip, and they had to straighten my nose back out, and that was it. And the thing about that, the funny part about that, is somehow between that time of broken neck to "you're okay," the news had gotten out, and somehow news had gotten to the paper in Sierra Vista or Bisbee, and then to Sierra Vista, and they said a Horse Patrol agent was injured in Naco, and he has passed during life flight to Tucson.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So I died.
Yeah.
Well,
so
now you're the second resurrection I know about in this world.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my claim to fame is I died.
That came back. Now let me ask you real quick. You used a term earlier, and I think I know what it means, but you said you got buck fever.
Yeah, buck fever. Like when you're hunting and that 4-point buck turns into a 30-point buck.
Okay.
And you start sweating, and you're like just ready to go and get that.
It's almost going, like that chase instinct when you see the aliens cross it, jump in front of you on the road, and you just get out and start running.
Yeah, well, okay. Adrenaline fueled, because I'm looking at that group, and I'm like, that's a big group, and it wasn't as many as I thought, because I'm like, oh my God, this is the biggest group I've ever seen. And it wasn't.
But that horse was not having it.
Nope, and still wasn't having it after that. And it wasn't a couple months after that, one of the FOSs took him. A guy named Murray Adams adopted him, took him into Mexico because his family's in Mexico.
Okay.
So, Chester was, and they called him. I called him all kinds of bad names after that, but it was my fault. It was my fault. Anytime you have a bad horse wreck, it's your fault. Doesn't matter if you step on a rattlesnake or not. If you can't stay in the middle of them. Or step off because you don't know better. So the horse is going to do what a horse is going to do. So,
well, that's good to know. So then you ended up retiring as what did you say? The acting pack of Spokane sector.
No, acting pack of Medellin Falls Station.
Medellin Falls. I'm sorry. Okay, so you retired from there. So how did you come around to finding out about Jeff Milton and your connection to him?
It actually happened because about a couple of years after I got on Horse Patrol, it was like 2002. We had a camp out, and I was at that point I was a Horse Patrol trainer, and so I was teaching these guys. We had an arena on Fort Huachuca, and the last 4 days of a 3-week training we spend in the mountains. We teach them how to do rope corrals. We teach them how to do packing line. We teach them advanced tracking, that kind of stuff, and how to basically how to bivouac like those guys were doing in the wash outside of Colorado City, just simple life.
Yep.
And and show that it can be done, and you don't need Wi-Fi and all that crap. And we didn't. I mean, back then there wasn't hardly any cell phones. So
right.
But what happened was we came down there, and an A chief from Tucson, who was over the whole Horse Patrol program, named John France. And one of our guest instructors who was teaching us tracking was a 4-star Class 1, oldest guy in the class, named Jim Grasky. And I don't know if you've heard of him, but
I have heard of him. Yes.
Yeah, he's I think he lives in Tucson now. But he came out to teach that tracking class, and we're just sitting around the fire, passing around the flask. You know, probably I don't know what we had in it. It was whiskey, and he was telling us stories. And Jeff Milton came up, and at that point, I was like, I don't know who that is.
Whoa.
So, and you know, and I'm what, 4 years in the patrol already.
Yeah, but you never in your entire life you never knew that.
Never heard his name before. So, Grasky and Carl Norton and Larry Jurdy, they were all there telling stories, and I was like, okay, I got to write that down. So it wasn't long after that I got on eBay, and they're like, oh, you're never going to be able to find that book. It's impossible to find. And you know, I found it. Came out of
I got the same one.
A library in Las Vegas. So read up on it, and I never read the footnotes, so I didn't put two and two together. And even then, there's a guy named Jim Reed in there, which is my dad's name, which is my name. And I was like, well, I don't associate with that guy. He's kind of a bad guy. He's later on, like in 6 or something.
Yeah.
But I didn't never put it together. And then when Bear told me, and then after that sent me the letter, I sent the letter to my cousin, who would be Lee Rice's great grandson. Mm-hmm. And he's like, man, this upends everything I knew about a lot of this stuff. And he goes, it does explain why people in our family have kind of followed, because I'm sure Lee was sitting around the dinner table telling these stories about what he did when he was working for, you know, those ranchers down there, working for his brother. And then he also worked for Goodnight and Loving. And that was towards the end before he brought the cattle out to New Mexico. Mm-hmm. But, you know, Goodnight and Loving were, right? And they based, well, Charles Goodnight and Loving were the biggest ranchers in Texas at the time.
Okay.
And they had a place up north of Colorado City. And they did a movie or a miniseries about them, based on them, called Lonesome Dove.
Okay.
And that was Captain Paul and Gus McCrae was based on Goodnight and Loving.
Yeah, the only two ranchers I ever heard about was John Chisholm and Henry Hooker.
Yeah.
And only because it was played by Charlton Heston.
Right.
And John Wayne.
And the Hookers is my family. The Hooker Ranch here is my family. So.
Okay.
And the Chisholms
from on
the
right.
Part of the Chisholms are actually part of that whole. So the Chisholms actually helped Goodnight and Loving run the ranches that were associated under the Goodnight Loving corporation, basically in New Mexico.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, Chisholm was a big part of New Mexico.
So man, you see how this whole thing comes together. Like you got Billy the Kid, you got all these other stories just all of a sudden, boom. It's like, what a small old Wild West world, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'll add just one little more thing on Lee before we get rid of that. But he said in the letter that he brought 50 head of cattle out to New Mexico to start his ranch. Well, one of the characters and one of the cowboys was a black cowboy that worked for Goodnight, and his name was Leeds.
Bose Ickard.
Well, his name was Bose Ickard was his name, but Dietz was his name in the movie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bose Ickard was a black cowboy, and that black cowboy took those 50 head with my great-great-grandfather and helped him homestead here, and then Ickard went up to Colorado. So I thought that was pretty neat.
One day you woke up and you got this guy named Bear saying that you're connected to Jeff Milton. How did that come about?
Well, it came about when he went to that museum and he was going through files, and he's like, well, I think he made the connection. He's like, Lee Rice. And then he saw the letterhead in Cliff, New Mexico. He's like, man, I bet this guy's related to Reed.
Well, I knew he was. So
how?
So, okay. So Dirt and I, we go back to my first, we go back to the original station together. He and I were agents together in Naco back in the day. And we were good friends and worked together a lot in the field. And then I went to Sector for some stuff, and he ended up souping up and going over to Deming. And then he came back and came back to Lordsburg as a soup, and I souped up in Lordsburg, and we worked together for several years over in Lordsburg. So I figured you were going to tell the story of the dog pile at your house after the horse patrol training where everybody tried to get me down and I picked everybody up.
That was a whole different kind of wreck.
That was a definite horse wreck. Benji didn't know what was happening. He was like,
"There was a lot of big men trying to destroy my house." I felt I was the smallest guy in there, and I'm 6'1", 250 pounds, and I'm the smallest guy in there. And I was like, I'm not doing anything.
So, but we were on the horse patrol together in Lordsburg.
Yeah, I was your trainer.
Yep. He was there when I did the infamous face plant into the ground, and Junior Helbig was like, "Did that hurt?" And I was like, "I don't know." And he goes, "Because it looked like it hurt." I was like, "Thanks, Junior. I love you too, man." But yeah, we rode some horses in the field and together out there in Lordsburg, and we would go. So him being from there and me not being from there, you know, I was always over at his house one way or another doing something. And same kind of a Naco too, you know, it goes back to that whole family thing of everything that we do to, you know, we've been friends for 23 years, you know, he's one of my best friends, you know, it's one of those. And so his grandmother, we would go visit his grandma, and his grandma was Blue's daughter. Correct?
Yes.
And his grandma, when I knew her, she was in her 80s at that point. She was but man, that lady could cook. Holy cow, that little lady could cook. She made me an apple pie for my birthday one year, and she told me I didn't have to share. And I was nice, and I did share. But we talked a lot about, and he and I went out to the ranch several times where the homestead was, and he would show me around and talk about a lot of so I knew that his grandmother's name was Rice, and I knew that Blue Rice. And then I just was like, and then he was like, I was like, Lee Rice, Clifton, there's no way that this Rice can't be that Rice.
Wow.
So I was like, holy cow. And I looked at the book at first. I showed it to him. I showed him the footnote quite a few years ago. I was like, hey, is this somebody? He goes, oh, yeah. And then I was down there looking through the files, and I found that letter, and I was like, and I was literally sitting at the table. I just took a picture of it with my phone, shot it to him, and said, hey, have you ever seen this? He's like, I have never seen that in my life. Holy cow. And, you know, it was just really kind of cool to be able to help him connect to. I look at it and go, he did a whole career in the Border Patrol, and quite a few years before knowing who Milton was. But then later on, finding out who Milton was, connection through his family, you know, and it was like kind of really cool to be able to.
The fact that Jeff Milton was such an impression on my great-great-grandfather Lee, you know, it comes through in that cowboy letter, you know, it comes through.
It sure does.
I mean, the guy was 78 years old and still like, you're the awesome.
He sounded like a kid writing to his hero.
Yeah, like a fan letter.
Yeah.
Like John Wayne.
So just so everybody understands, and I understand, Lee Rice turns out to be your great-great-grandfather that had this connection with Jeff Milton. And so you finding this out, what changed?
Well, it actually cemented a lot of things that I was doing the right thing, that I was where I was supposed to be.
Okay.
That you know, my feelings of justice and being a just man, having integrity and living the cowboy way was still something I was able to do and still have a uniform on, because I missed the uniform from the Air Force, and, you know, missed the job security too. I'm not saying, and I'm sure Jeff was the same way back then. It's like, I need some job security.
Yeah.
This is a constant paycheck. So, you know, and for me, it was just another way of me knowing that I'm in the right job and in the right career. And to follow a guy like that, and to be able to say that, you know, he's the first Border Patrol agent, and I've never doubted that he was the first Border Patrol agent.
I think a lot of
hearing more stories about it.
Yeah. And hopefully, you know, we can rectify that soon.
And I'm glad I have that connection.
Yes.
And I'm glad I can bring that connection to y'all.
Well, what I love about it, right, is I feel different just being able to speak to you, because again, it's this history that people, we tend to put history like way over there, and okay, yeah, that was then, this is now, but there is such a strong connection, such a strong thread, right? Again, Jeff Milton later on, as we start talking about the rest of his years, talking about the fact that all that land from Big Bend to Tombstone was worked by Jeff Milton. We worked that land as Border Patrol agents, and a lot of the things funneled into our culture and our psyche and our fight, just ingrained in us, in our DNA as Border Patrol agents, is all that history. And many of us today aren't even aware about that anymore. And so where's the pride, right? Where's that esprit de corps? Where's that connection? I still believe 100% that connection between Jeff Milton and the Border Patrol agent, the LineWatch agent today, has not diminished or been cut in the slightest. Nope. Right? It goes through its ups and downs, and I know we're going through a few times right now, but that's for a whole other podcast. But you know what I mean? But the pride in our history and our heritage and our legacy. And that's why I love guys like Bear. I love guys like Joe Banco, like Cliff, Cliff Gill, that really want to preserve it and really want to keep it alive. But we are trying here today, right now in this podcast, Dirt, is to make agents today recognize and understand that, just like the day you find out Milton was connected to you, just like I want these guys to understand that that's our connection. That's our inheritance. That's our legacy from that point on.
It's important to know our history.
Oh, 100%. Right. I was so glad to hear when, that Bear sent me one time, he did a presentation out there and he's talking to these guys about Jeff Milton. And I think from this point on in the history of the patrol, there's got to be a place where, just like when I was in the Marine Corps, I used to pray to Chesty Puller every night. Right, because he was the god of the Corps, and I think that recognizing that every agent from 1924 through, well, even before that, because there was a lot of mounted patrol even back then, till to this moment, we're all ancestors. That's our ancestry. We're all descendants of guys like Jeff Milton.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, yeah.
So just a real quick one. There's he showed me this many years ago, and I've taken some photos of it.
Lots of your photos.
Yeah.
This guy?
Oh my God.
Yep. That's Lee Rice's rifle.
Wow.
Lee Rice has passed on to Blue, passed on to my dad, passed on to me. And what was it? Also Bear.
So that rifle is documented as taking the last grizzly bear in the state of New Mexico.
Ooh, wow. Yeah. Well, that's a beauty. Is it still functional?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I already cleared it this morning, so.
Okay, good.
It's good to go.
And, even legends have been known to have accidental discharges.
That's another story.
That's a whole nother story. But yeah, I thought that was really kind of cool, was the fact that, that being able to bring that back around, being able to bring that to agents and say, like for me, knowing Jeff Milton is only one agent away. Like I met Marion Russell, when he was 100. Well, he knew Jeff Milton. Oh, so I can look back and I can go, I shook the hand of the man who shook the hand of the guy that established what we do. Dirk can look back and go, that man made such an impression.
Yes.
On my great-great-grandfather that it passed literally by DNA through to me. Yeah. And that connection is there.
And a line of lawmen.
Yeah, and a line of lawmen,
Because Lee's son became a deputy sheriff and on down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, no, that's marvelous. So you know what? I think we should end on that note for today, because I don't want to rush this. and I don't want to have to, skip corners. So we still got quite a bit to go, as far as talking about, again, the shenanigans and how it all, but, let's spend the last few moments here before we close talking about how this relates to today's modern agent, Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And we brushed on it a little bit, right? But tell us your thoughts on that.
Let me get back up into my notes here a little bit where I can, some of the things that I look at today is, where we work today.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter if it was 1880 something or it's 2023 going to be 2024. Where we work as agents is still kind of the Wild West out there. The players have changed and the things have gotten, honestly, a lot more dangerous. They're using vehicles to hurt people with now and stuff like that. Used to be, it was gunfights from a distance and, that kind of thing. But there's still, that kind of stuff still happens. We didn't touch on it a whole lot, but the one thing is you got, when you're doing a job like this, you got to have a good time. Nope. You got to. It's just I've always talked it that we see the dregs of humanity in this job so often that it can get you down if you don't find an outlet, you don't find something, and hang out,
approach it with the right perspective.
Right. Yeah. You develop those friendships, you pull those shenanigans. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know how many times Dart and I have, pulled something on each other, literally, like I said, fast ones on each other, locking each other in the bathroom and spraying, OC under the door and different things like that,
Yes.
Never something disgusting on your door handle on your truck.
Literally.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All like waking up with a, like dead fish in your bed when you wake up in the morning or something like that.
Yep.
There's never been any of that. If you can't find a good, you have to, and we are a family. Like it's it doesn't matter if you're a brand new agent or you retired in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
We're all a family because we have all worked those trails. We've all worked those, we've ridden those roads. We've ridden them trails. We've sweat. We've bled. We've beat each other, we've lost friends together. We've had children. We've raised families, we've become part of each other's lives. And it doesn't matter if, you're a brand new agent, you prove yourself. We literally had this conversation the other day with another guy that is a friend of ours. He was saying the first thing everybody says when they talk about this guy is that he was yelling at him. And I was like, well, he had an expectation. Here's where his expectation was. And if you stepped up to him, you were good. Stepped up to it, you were good in his eyes. It was, we worked together. We did all those things. And by proxy of that, you get a much bigger family.
Yes.
Doesn't matter. It's, if you're, like I said, I don't know how many times I've slept in Dirt's house, falling asleep.
Yeah.
I can say I've actually slept on Dirt's porch too.
Yeah, well, no doubt. No doubt. But that's the thing, right? So, right, Dirt, it's like we love the Mean Green family, our fellow agents and everybody from the newest nug to the oldest salty PA, and we all still bleed green, right?
Right. And I think that's why it's important to keep Jeff Milton's name alive, his legacy alive.
Yes.
Because if you read the book and you see what kind of man he was, it's the kind of man that we all want to strive for. It's the kind of man that we want to shoot as fast as him. We want to be able to make a split decision as fast as him. Yep. We want to use officer discretion like he did.
Yes.
We want to be that guy. And that's why it's so important to keep what you guys are doing, what you're doing with the podcast, what Barry's doing with the history, is keep it alive. And we raise a whole another level of 10-8 agents,
Yeah.
because they have a baseline. I need to be like that guy.
Well,
And
it's striving
I
for
think
a
that's
bigger
important.
picture, right? We're not just looking at what's in front of us, even though what's happening right now is beyond the pale of the history of this entire country. It's still the idea of, looking what's in front of us and getting that done, but seeing the bigger picture on the outside and how it's formulated for 100 years now, right? For 100 years, we've had three of the worst years in the history of this country, but that does not negate or destroy the other 97 years of our history, just like it doesn't destroy my 25 years of the best damn job I ever had.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Like you would believe that and you feel that same way.
I do.
Yeah, 100%. So that does. So at first I was like, I'm looking at this centennial and I'm not feeling it too much. But then somebody reminded me, so like, well, does that mean the 27 years you worked worth of shit? I'm like, no. Does that mean the 97 years that the Border Patrol, has upheld and in many ways still does today, even with this nightmare? There's still guys and gals out there that are that are the best trackers you'll ever see, that are the best, dope sniffers on the highways you'll ever see, that are still, they bleed green and they swore an oath. And the fact that the obstacles are in front of them is a whole different thing. But then again, not like today, but every era from Jeff Milton, and we're gonna get a lot into that, right, Bear? We're talking about the office politics and all that, even with the father of the patrol. So we're gonna be getting to that into that in the future. But it's about the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
That's
one of the things that I wrote down in my notes was leadership changes.
Yeah.
Learn from everybody and understand that you have to stand for what's right.
One way or the other.
Because the title change. Because the title change, and then your thought process, your ideology, your sense of justice will come back around and be popular again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you just continue to. That's the thing I want to pass to people in the field is you can only do what you can do.
Yes.
Don't let it burn you out, but do the best that you can do every chance you get.
I've been telling guys that because I get phone calls every week. I don't know how much more I can take about this, Gil. I'm done with this crap. And I say, look, go to work and do what you can. Yep. Make your off life the best life. Make that count. Your family, your friends, whatever it is, off duty, make that count for the best and stick it out because the freaking retirement is glorious.
Well, you two are there. I'm just
well, not only that, but Lord willing, in these next elections or whatever, the pendulum will shift and we can get back to what we were created to do from the beginning.
Right.
And so
we just do our job.
Yeah.
What we do. I'm here to do my job. I've been charged to do this, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. And hopefully I fall down every day and fall short of that mark that I think he left, that Milton left. But and I look at a lot of the other players throughout my career that I've known and guys that are just, I wish I could be that guy.
Yeah.
And I know I fall short of it, but that doesn't mean I'm just going to quit. I'm going to strive to continue to be that way. That way, hopefully I make an impression on the next generation to try and be that way.
Yeah. And one final thing, and I'll give you the last word, Dirt. The one final thing I'll say is that the one thing the Border Patrol does do well is look out for each other. Look out for that fellow green uniform. You don't have to like that person. You don't have to, party with them or, have dinner with them or whatever. You don't have to be their friend. But if there's a badge and a uniform right there that needs me, active or retired, I will jump out of my car and I will take care of business backing up that individual while I'm physically able, right? That never changes.
Yeah. Well, and always be there for your agents. In fact, I'm leaving here in less than an hour to drive to Tucson to go to the retirement of one of my classmates, 390.
Okay.
And she was a honor guard and all that. And I'm going to go to Tucson, and I'm staying with one of my guys that was one of my subordinates down in Lordsburg as a horse patrol agent. And he's probably the biggest he's one of the guys that tried to bring down Bear and it didn't work. But he's 6'9", 260, and just, you know. And I put it, of course, when we got the freaking Mustangs, I put him on the smallest one because I thought it was funny.
That is hilarious.
He was dragging his toes.
Yeah.
But
well, you give that agent our congratulations on their retirement as well. And I'll tell you what,
sure.
Dirt, it's a real pleasure having you on with us today. I hope you'll come back.
Every minute. I will if you want me to.
Heck yeah.
I'm hoping that he'll come back when we get to the Mogollon and the San Mateos and the Mogollon, because that's the country that he grew up actually working.
Okay. That's my hunting.
That was his hunting, and where the family ranch was at was actually part of the Mogollon range. So he can talk to some of that, and maybe we can get a hold of Kenny, and because I don't have any contact with him anymore, but if you do, we might reach out to Kenny and see, because his family they homesteaded the Blacktail, the Members, and in the Blacktail Canyon area, which is all that kind of stuff too, and maybe
that's the Stocktons.
Yeah, Kenny Stockton. Okay. Kenny, if you're out there, reach out to Dirt or reach out to me or something, so we can get you on here so we can talk about your family, because his family's got a rifle too that's pretty cool.
Oh man, well, I'm looking forward to seeing that. So keep track of what we didn't do today, Bear, and we'll take up where we left off next time. Again, guys, it's an honor and a privilege to sit here with you and having you on there to discuss Jeff Milton and this series that we're going to be doing, and looking forward to some great news and things to come in the future, hopefully, concerning Jeff Milton.
Doing great work, Gil.
Take care, guys.
Take care. See ya.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of the Old Patrol HQ podcast. Barry and I will continue to walk you through the life and times of Jeff Milton, the forefather of the modern-day LineWatch agent, and the best is yet to come. Please subscribe and share this podcast dedicated to the rich history, heritage, and legacy of the Patrol, with a few shenanigans along the way. Also, follow Old Patrol HQ for the best and most honest coverage of this current border invasion, with intel straight from the field, raw and unfiltered. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and visit my store full of the most unique and exclusive Old Patrol gear at oldpatrolhq.bigcartel.com. Till next time, honor first, honor always, or no honor at all.